So today we cancel USA Today for an article published yesterday, originally titled, "What the Public Keeps Getting Wrong About Pedophilia." A link to the article was initially posted to Twitter along with a lengthy thread explaining that pedophilia is misunderstood and misrepresented, but the actual article was hidden behind a paywall. A short time later, the entire thread was deleted, and a new tweet was posted explaining, quote, "A previous thread did not include all information, and the story it was written about is behind a paywall. We made the decision to delete the thread." They also apparently made the decision to change the headline of the article, which is now titled, "The Complicated Research Behind Pedophilia." Now, it's impossible to know what other edits they may have made, but they removed the paywall, and let's read a little bit from the article as it now stands. Quote, "Pedophilia is viewed as among the most horrifying social ills, but scientists who study the sexual disorder say it is also among the most misunderstood. When most of the public thinks of pedophilia, they assume it's synonymous with child sexual abuse, a pervasive social problem that has exploded to crisis levels online. Researchers who study pedophilia say the term describes an attraction, not an action, and using it interchangeably with abuse fuels misperceptions. The American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders says that pedophilia is defined by, quote, recurrent, intense, sexually arousing fantasies, sexual urges, or behaviors involving sexual activity with a prepubescent child or children. Scientists have, in recent decades, improved their understanding of pedophilia's causes, prenatal and early childhood risk factors, as well as how pedophiles can better control impulses. One of the most significant findings is that scientists who study this disorder say that pedophilia is determined in the womb, though environmental factors may influence whether someone acts on an urge to abuse." All right, the article then goes on to favorably reference Alan Walker. You may remember Walker as the creepy college professor who advocates for destigmatizing pedophilia. Walker is affiliated with the Prostasia Foundation, which we've talked about on the show. He's appeared on there, he or she, I can't remember which one, on their YouTube channel and in interviews on their site. This is an organization that is several levels beyond creepy and which is also concerned with destigmatizing pedophilia. In fact, if you go to Prostasia's website right now, the very first thing that pops up is a, quote, safety guide for, quote, age play. If you're wondering what that is, Prostasia explains that age play is, quote, a form of role play in which at least one of the participants adopts the role or mindset of someone younger, a teenager, a child, or even a baby. So now you have some idea of what we're dealing with. Back to the article in Alan Walker. It says, an academic at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia, who's talked about destigmatizing pedophilia and referred to pedophiles as minor attracted people, resigned in November following the outcry over the phrase. Alan Walker argued destigmatizing the attraction would allow more people to seek help and ultimately prevent child sexual abuse. There is growing support in the field for Walker's point of view. While clinical psychologist James Cantor said there is no treatment that can turn a pedophile into a non-pedophile, pedophiles can be taught self-control and compensatory strategies, which he said is more likely if they're under the care of a professional. He argues that pedophiles need to be able to access therapy, which can be difficult since those afflicted may be ashamed to seek help or worried about being reported to the authorities if they do. Now, what can we say about all of this after we finish vomiting into the nearest trash can? The most generous possible interpretation is that the author, and those quoted in the piece, are drawing a distinction between impulse and action and advocating for strategies to help prevent pedophiles from converting those horrific impulses into action. Now, that sentiment alone by itself, the idea that we want to stop pedophiles from acting on their desires, is of course uncontroversial. Everyone agrees. It's so obvious that it's not a point that really needs to be made. Now, it could be a worthwhile discussion if you're presenting actual, tangible prevention strategies. But all that the author of this piece, the author's name, by the way, is Aliyah Destiger, has to offer is therapy. That's a rather broad and useless suggestion, especially because it requires us to have faith in the psychological industry to handle the issue effectively and appropriately, and I have no such faith. And that brings us to the larger problem. Although there is a nugget of truth here, that there's a difference between desire and action, and we want to prevent the actions. Again, obviously, we want to prevent the actions. But the very troubling and ultimately fatal flaw is that the morsel of common sense is couched in a lot of pablum about destigmatizing pedophilia. They're treated as a valid community, an oppressed community, a victim class in their own right. And much emphasis is placed on the claim that pedophiles are born with this desire. Now, that latter point may also be true in some cases. It's possible that something has gone wrong in the brain of the pedophile, and that at least in some cases, we can trace the problem back to the womb. Now, that entirely removes the moral and spiritual element, once again medicalizing the problem of human evil, which is a problem. But it wouldn't surprise me if there was some sort of neurochemical facet to this issue. Fine. But the problem is that all of this stuff, it's a community. They're stigmatized. They're oppressed. Their desires are natural, quote unquote. They're born with it. All of this has always been the pretense for eventually normalizing and then finally celebrating the act itself. Now, they're not doing it yet explicitly. Even the nightmarish Prostasia Foundation, with its guide for pedophilic sexual role play, isn't coming out and explicitly saying that it's normal or good to rape children. What we're witnessing now is the groundwork. They're digging the foundation. They're laying the bricks for the hideous building that they plan to construct. We've seen this process play out enough times to know where it leads. In fact, the idea that people who are born with certain sexual desires should repress them, refrain from acting on them, that is fundamentally incompatible with the leftist worldview anyway. That's how we know that when it comes to pedophilia normalization, the current point that we're at right now is but a stage that they're passing through on their way to the ultimate destination. Now, you might hope that this will be different because most of the other forms of perversion normalized by the left have involved consenting adults of various numbers and combinations. But children cannot consent, obviously. Perhaps the consent issue, you might hope, will create a barrier. It will be like Gandalf standing on the bridge, screaming, "You shall not pass." This is the one boundary that the fiery demon of leftism cannot cross, you might say, you might hope. But we know that the left is already hard at work on this issue as well, on breaking down the idea of consent. Because they tell us that children, very young children as young as 2 or 3, can consent to all sorts of things, make all kinds of decisions, even sexual decisions. They can consent to change their gender. See, you see how another foundation right now is also being formed. More bricks are being laid. Eventually, the 2 construction projects will be connected, and within a few years, I give it maybe 5 years, the actual act of pedophilia will be openly and explicitly defended. This USA Today article is just one of the opening salvos in that effort. And for that reason, USA Today is today canceled. Listen, hit that subscribe button right now. Do it right now. I thank you for your compliance. It is somewhat appreciated.